Um, I'd like to welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. I know it's a chilly night, but we obviously all really care about Wayne and are looking for a real vision for Wayne. So we'd love your input. This is Adam Texa. He's our consultant, and he'll be explaining sort of some of the particulars about how we'll get your feedback. But first, we have a couple of presentations.
So thank you very much. Can everybody hear me if I just? Great. Nice to see some new faces, some familiar faces here today. As Maggie said, my name is Adam Texa. I'm the Urban Design Practice Manager with FHI Studio, now IMEG. We're based out of Center City, Philadelphia. And what I'm going to do today is give you a quick overview of sort of the agenda, a little bit of introduction to the work, and then I'm going to hand it off to a couple of people who are going to talk about some details. So we are going to try to give you a quick presentation, an hour's quick, right, of sort of the overview of what this study is. But particularly what we want to focus on today is the retail findings and the findings of our parking analysis. And I'll get into a little bit of details on that because we know that's something that a lot of people care about. Many of you who were here early saw all the boards that we have out there. There's going to be plenty of time, an hour, for you to circulate around and to put some sticky dots on things, leave some notes, and talk with all of us about a lot of the things that we're going to be hearing about today. Quick introduction. So my name's Adam Texa, as I said. I'm joined here today by Megan from Walker Consultants. She's our sub-consultant working on parking. And I'm also joined by Michael, who's our retail lead from MBJ Consultants, okay? Oh, sorry. MJB, I'm sorry about that. As a Texa and a FHI Studio, I get a lot of different versions, so my apologies. I want to give you a quick overview. If you all want to know more about this, please visit A Vision for Wayne if you have not. A lot of this information is already on the website. But this study that we're doing for Wayne actually has its origins in the community engagement work that we did on A Vision for Radnor, which was a comprehensive plan. We put out a survey that allowed people to put dots, basically, virtual dots, on the entire township and say, these are areas where I've got an idea or I want to see an improvement or where we think things should be different. And then we created this heat map. And in this heat map, there was this glowing red dot around Wayne. And we said, that's interesting. And we dug into the details a little bit, and we really said, this is beyond the scale of what we can cover in a comprehensive plan. And we encourage the township to go to DVRPC, which is the regional planning entity for the greater Philadelphia region, and go for a grant. And the township did get a grant. They put in some matching funds to support the parking and the retail analysis. And that's where we are today. That's what got us here today. The study area, as many of you guys will see out there, is basically the Wayne Business Overlay District. It's a sort of zoning designation. It also includes an area just north of the station. Part of the reason why we included that is the grant funding is tied to a relationship between land use and transportation, particularly public transportation. So we wanted to include the other side of the rail line. The core planning elements, so the core topics that we're going to be making recommendations are land use. So that's like whether it should be residential or housing or office. It has to do with sort of zoning, business attraction and retention, parking, multimodal mobility, which is just a fancy way of saying all the different ways that you can get around, walking, biking, taking transit, driving, scooters. I don't know, now we've got like 100 different ways to get around. Housing diversity and affordability, stormwater management, placemaking, which is just talking about the quality of the public realm, and then putting together an action plan, a sort of implementation strategy. But today, we're really going to be focused on that business attraction and retention and parking. And part of the reason for that is, one, we've got two really great sub-consultants who are going to speak directly to that issue. But those were two issues that we heard over and over again as part of the comprehensive plan and part of the early engagement that people had a lot of questions about. And we think that there's a need for a lot more information out there about what's actually happening versus sort of like what you might be seeing when you go there every once in a while. As part of this process, we're going to have a lot of touch points, and we've had a lot of touch points with you all through this process. There's a technical advisory committee. That's a group of people who have expertise in a lot of these subject areas. So like SEPTA is on that technical advisory committee. DOT was invited. They haven't showed up, but we're still talking to them. We're also doing a bunch of stakeholder interviews. And so, sorry, I went the wrong way. So we've been talking to a lot of people, including PennDOT and SEPTA and Amtrak, the Wayne Senior Center, Radnor Memorial Library, the Wayne Business Authority, business owners, property owners, just a ton of people who are doing things in the study area to learn about what's going on. We've got a survey, how many people have taken the survey already? Awesome. Great way to get your input. If you are at all concerned about somebody who hasn't had an opportunity to be here tonight and they're like, man, the snow or my kids or whatever, I'm just a little tired and want to stay home and watch Grey's Anatomy or something, get them to take the survey. That's a great way for them to get their input in. We had a workshop previously that was in Wayne. We were on that sort of small parking lot that's adjacent to North Wayne Avenue. It was a little windy that day, and so we wanted to make sure to have another engagement opportunity where you could kind of get the full breadth of stuff. The workshop that we're doing today, we've also done commissioner presentations, and we'll do more and do a final presentation. So before I turn it over to the sub-consultants to talk about parking and retail, I just want to talk a little bit about where we are in the process and where we're going. So we've done a lot of technical analysis on this work. So you'll see out there, we've mapped, one of the things we heard is some of the early engagement, that walking around Wayne can be problematic, that there are issues with sidewalk and connectivity. So you'll see out there a map of all the sidewalks and the condition of those sidewalks, where they're missing, where they're inadequate, where we think they're adequate. You'll see stuff on parking and retail and housing out there on placemaking. So a lot of that work has already been done. We're sort of in the midst of the meaty part of this community engagement piece. We're obviously going to be wrapping it up. Again, that survey and that workshop are ongoing right now. We're going to leave the survey up for another week, so a week from tomorrow likely is when we're going to close it. So if anybody has any opportunities, wants to get their thoughts in, now is the time. Then we're going to be putting together a draft plan. So we're going to take all the thoughts and ideas that are out here, a lot of the feedback, and put together something that is an initial draft. And one thing that I want to be really clear about is that's not the end of the engagement process. So we're going to give all of you an opportunity to comment on that draft. It'll be published on A Vision for Wayne, like everything else that we're doing. We're going to be making presentations to the Board of Commissioners, so they'll have an opportunity to provide comment, and then it'll move through the adoption process, likely this summer. That's sort of the target there. So with that, today, we're going to keep going. We're going to go into the retail findings and then the parking findings, and then there'll be an hour presentation or an hour for us to get into all the boards and talk to everybody here in a little bit more detail. One quick question.
The Board of Commissioner presentations you just mentioned, would they be in a public?
Oh, everything that I mentioned in this is public, and all the drafts are going to be put out on the website. You'll be able to have an opportunity to get that. If you didn't have a chance to sign up for the workshop like RSVP, please make sure your name is on the sign-in sheet. We will email you whenever anything comes out so that you all have an opportunity to read that and send in comments. And throughout this entire process, if you have a comment and you're like, hey, I was just in Wayne, I saw something, I'd really like the township to be thinking about it, there's an email address. It's info@avisionforwayne.com. Are we .com or .org? .com, I think. avisionforwayne.com. That will go directly to the project team, and we'll incorporate it into our process. All right. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mike. Thank you.
This is self-explanatory? Yes, okay. Thank you, Adam. Good evening. I think you are showing your out-of-dateness, Adam. It would not be Grey's Anatomy at this point. It would be The Pit. But at least you did not say ER, so I guess, you know, you're somewhere along the way. Yeah. But anyway, so my name is Mike Byrne. I am the president of MJB Consulting. I obsess about retail and the ground floor. Next, you'll be hearing from Megan. She will be talking about parking. My firm is a sub-consultant to Adam and FHI Studio / iMeg, I guess, new name. And my scope of work has specifically involved the retail piece, right? And this is some of what I've been doing. I did give a presentation, which I recognize a number of you as having attended back in October. It was kind of Retail 101. It was kind of like a basic primer on how retail leasing works and how downtown retail happens or doesn't happen. That is on the project website, so you can watch it there if you are so inclined. And also, I have spoken with a number of stakeholders, but as Adam said, we're still in the thick of that, so there's still a few more of those interviews that I'll be having with some of you out there, trying to really cut a wide swath, not just property owners, not just business owners, not just leasing professionals, but other kinds of stakeholders as well. So I'm not going to repeat the Retail 101, but I will reiterate a few especially important nuances or mental shifts, which it would be helpful for you to make as you're listening to this. Just one thing also, I know it earlier said that my presentation is going to be about retail findings. I guess that's not entirely true. It's really about giving you some things to think about and offer feedback on so that we can move to the next stage of a plan. So as you are thinking about what I'm saying and considering your feedback to it, a few nuances which it would be really important to keep in mind. One is that we often think of retail as, hey, I go shopping. And when I get up in the morning, you know, I could go to one of many different places to go shopping, right? And of course, when we make that choice, we are comparing those different places, right? Yes, we could shop in Wayne. We could go to King of Prussia. We go to Suburban Square. We can go to a number of different places, go to Center City. Well, retailers think the same way. And unlike most of the people, if not all the people in this room, they don't necessarily have any sentimental attachment to Wayne, right? And they are choosing Wayne or not choosing it based on the alternatives, right? And they're constantly comparing all of those different possibilities, right? So Wayne is not something that they think about as a retail location in a vacuum. They think about it vis-a-vis the other places where they can locate. And that's an important mental shift to make. That's kind of the decision set in front of them, right? And that's kind of what we have to keep in mind as we think about what really differentiates Wayne as a retail location, right? So there's kind of like two markets to consider here. There's you, the consumer, and there's also them, the retailer, right? And each, the consumer and the retailer, is thinking in terms of choices, right? There are retailers who you could just easily see on North Wayne Avenue that are now at Eagle Village Shops. And there are ones that are at Haverford Square, right? They made a choice at some point. And it's important for us to think about and to understand why they made the choice that they did. So just for a point of definition, retail I'm defining pretty broadly, right? I talked about shopping. I also include food and beverage within that. I include personal services. I basically include everything that welcomes walk-in trade, right? All of that is retail. The thing is, though, and you've probably noticed this, most districts, most centers have no trouble attracting food and beverage these days. They have no trouble attracting personal services. Those are the categories that have been expanding the most rapidly for a while now, right? Shopping is a little different, right? That's been contracting for a variety of reasons. It's not disappearing, but it's contracting, right? And that's kind of what I want to pay attention to now, because that's the hardest one. That's the hardest one in this day and age, right? We're not going to struggle to get in more restaurants. We're not going to struggle to get more personal services. But what is challenging for almost every district and center, unless you're King of Prussia, unless you're Suburban Square, unless you're Rittenhouse Row, is attracting and retaining the shopping, right? And that is ultimately what I'm hearing from a lot of you that you want to make sure is preserved here. We've heard a lot about don't let us have too many restaurants. We want to keep this balance, right? So for a few minutes, I'm going to just focus on that. And you know, there's a bunch of concepts in retail which kind of drive why retail is the way it is. For a long time, it happened in a certain way. We as consumers, whenever we are shopping for what's called comparison goods, right? These are the goods that for which we like to comparison shop. We'd like to choose from amongst a number of different options, right? That have different prices, different fashions, different levels of quality. That sort of comparison shopping for apparel, for footwear, for jewelry, for furniture, for home decor, those sorts of items, right? When we think about where we ideally want to shop for those, or at least what we have traditionally thought about in terms of where we would shop for those sorts of items, we wanted a really large selection, right? We wanted to comparison shop from as many options as possible, right? And retailers who sold those sorts of goods, they wanted to be in those places where we go to shop for those items. So they were drawn to where there's already the most selection of options, right? And so many of them ultimately converge on the same shopping center or district that you get what's called critical mass. It just takes off. There's just kind of like an exponential increase in the level of visitation, right? Because it's just so big and so much variety. And then that sort of critical mass has a gravity. And I'm sorry for using some wonkish terms. The big message of all this is bigger was better, right? The thing about King of Prussia, I think third biggest mall in the country. Yeah.
Just heads up, we're recording,
Yeah.
so you've got to get...
Oh, sorry, yeah, I always wander, so I'm sorry. King of Prussia, third largest mall in the country. It has pretty much everything. It has about as wide a selection as you can imagine. And until maybe 20 years ago, that really was what drove comparison shopping, right? Well, things have changed a little bit. We used to do that sort of power shopping. We used to want to shop for shoes with lots of different options. But there's a new dynamic now with retail. That we're not so much always looking for the biggest selection. Rather, we're looking for a different sort of experience, which I'll call, for lack of a better term, browse-worthy. It's a combination of some restaurants, some cafes, some boutiques, bookstore, a park, maybe a theater, a wide range of activities that constitute a leisurely afternoon, or a leisurely evening, or a leisurely afternoon into an evening, right? And in this sort of mix, you don't need large amounts of selection. You just need a smattering of boutiques, kind of interesting boutiques, different boutiques. And we're increasingly drawn to that, right? We increasingly want that experience, right? And what's interesting is that the retailers have caught on to this, right? And even some pretty large brands have caught on to this. They tend to be the brands that like to have this sort of boutique-y kind of positioning in the marketplace, like Blue Mercury or FP Movement, which many of you probably know is Free People Movement, is part of the Urban Outfitters anthropology empire. Jay McLaughlin, Anthropology, Warby Parker. You start to see these retailers not just in these large malls, but also in these neighborhood shopping streets, just like Wayne, right? And that's something new. That we've started to see. I have 5 minutes left? Oh, 10, okay. And more to the point, that's something which Wayne currently offers. In fact, I know we've heard a lot that there's no shopping in Wayne. Actually, Wayne has more shopping than probably 99.8% of the downtowns in this country. Yeah. Yeah. That was my point, though, that they're even looking. Oh, sorry. But that's the point, that even they're starting to gravitate to this because this has become a new dynamic that retailers want to be a part of, not just independents, right? And that will become important later on, right? But this is something which Wayne currently offers. It actually has some shopping. Most downtowns don't have shopping anymore. Wayne still has some. No, it's not gone. There's an.
I'm going to just ask everybody, you're going to have plenty of time to talk to all of us there. Let's just let Mike give his presentation.
Yeah. So there's quite a few shops here. They're not the kinds of shops that used to be here. And the perfect example, if you look at two sporting goods stores, Wayne Sporting Goods versus Out There Outfitters. Yes, technically they're in the same category of merchandise, but they're very different, right? Out There Outfitters is a little bit more of a niche, right? It's a little more specialty. It's not your sporting goods essentials, right? And as you'll see, that part of that is because the essentials in all these different categories, we don't necessarily shop for those in downtowns anymore. Those are what we shop for in strip malls. Those are what we shop for in enclosed malls. We do it less and less in downtowns. So these sorts of shops have to have some sort of niche or specialty positioning, right? So when we think about downtown Wayne and what it can be, indeed what it might have to be, we have to think of the retail in the downtown as somehow having a destination appeal. And that's because the number of people who actually live within walking distance, who don't have to get into a car to get here, is well below what downtown Wayne needs to support all of its retail. We need to be able to draw from well beyond, right? And so it has to be a destination for those living further afield, right? It can't just be people nearby. It can't even just be people in Wayne, right? It's got to pull from a much larger, as they call it, trade area, right? And that usually corresponds to comparison shopping, to restaurants, to bars. It does not necessarily correspond to these essentials I was talking about, the conveniences, right? Convenience retail, as opposed to comparison retail, that's the stuff you just want to do and get it out of the way. It's your errands, right? It's your dry cleaning, it's your prescription drugs. It's just the stuff that you want to get in and out. And usually in a context like Wayne, you want to get in and out in your car, right? Not easy to do on a North Wayne Avenue. Not even easy to do in the part of Lancaster Avenue that's right near North Wayne Avenue. Much easier to do as you go further out, right? And so that's why Lancaster Avenue is where you see a lot of the bank branches, is where you see a lot of the fast food restaurants, is where you see the Wawas, is where you see the large format drugstores to the extent that they still exist, right? Because they want to be able to provide for you that in and out convenience, right? It's much harder for those sorts of businesses to survive in a walking environment, right? All right, so, and so we have kind of, and I won't get into too much detail about this, we've kind of divided our study area into different sub-districts which correspond to the kinds of retailers that tend to be drawn to it, right? On North Wayne Avenue, which is kind of traditional Main Street, it is unique for the main line. Yes, Ardmore and Bryn Mawr have their own downtowns. They're stretched for the most part along Lancaster Avenue, right? and that is something which Wayne, it's kind of its ace in the hole. Malvern, has kind of a more authentic Main Street feel, but it has, it's not on Lancaster Avenue. It doesn't have that visibility. So North Wayne, then there's a part of Lancaster Avenue that's right near North Wayne, which not only is kind of in the core, but also gets visibility to all the automobile traffic passing by, right? And I didn't mean to say off-site parking. They have a few spaces in front. But generally, this is best for what I would call the every so often uses, right? The uses that you need every so often, not all the time, right? Every so often, and the retailer wants you to know where it is when you need it. Ballard Designs. How many times is someone going to shop in Ballard Designs in a 3-month period? Maybe once, if that, right? But because it's on Lancaster Avenue, you know where it is when you need it, right? Those are the sorts of uses which like that kind of location. Oh, and then there's periphery, what I'm calling, which is further away on Lancaster Avenue. And I subdivide those into 2 different types. There's Lancaster Avenue, where you have these kind of older buildings. They usually have uses upstairs. There's maybe 1 row of parking spaces in front. Auto suboptimal, I'm calling it, because it's limited parking, right? And while it has the pass-by visibility of being on Lancaster Avenue, it's not as easy to park, and so you tend to have more affordable retail space there, right? And then you have Lancaster Avenue Auto, which is the pass-by visibility and lots of on-site parking, right? So like, this is called Wayne Square, the names for these. This shopping center, perfect example, right? That, as strip malls go, is an incredibly well-tenanted center, given the tenants that are there. And that's because they, what? Well-tenanted. These are retailers that landlords, for better or worse, love to have, right? They might not be what you like, necessarily, but they're pretty much, each one of them, a tenant that they love to have, right? And that's partly because it's so easy to park there, right? And it has that visibility. So anyway, the last point I want to make is that, I got the question quite a bit. Why are we doing anything about retail, right? I mean, I know there was a few vacancies before, but there's really no vacancies now. I mean, what is the problem that we're really trying to solve here? And that's a fair question, right? When your vacancy is near 0, right, why do you need even a strategy? Well, partly it's because right now, downtown Wayne is in some level of equilibrium. There's some restaurants, there's not too many, right? There's a few chains, not many, right? That's a moment in time, right? That's a snapshot, right? And retail doesn't stand still, especially in as strong a market as Wayne. So what looks right now like pretty good situation with a pretty good balance of things, that can change in a hurry. And one of the things we're trying to do here is try to understand what happens to Wayne's retail mix if the township does nothing. If we just let market forces do their thing, what will downtown Wayne's retail mix look like in 5 years, right? Well, and there's a few factors here which portend some change, right? Retailers really want to be here, and more of them want to be here. And at the same time, when you have close to 0 vacancy, and there's not many spaces for them to occupy, what happens, right? Demand increases, supply stays the same, rents go up, right? Furthermore, FP movement is paying a pretty healthy rent, right? And the way a lot of landlords work, they see that, and they're like, why can't I get that? What? I mean, even though this is a great space, it's right at Wayne, North Wayne and Lancaster Avenue, a lot of landlords might be salivating right now. Wow, they got that much per square foot? What am I charging when I'm charging right now? I could get a lot more, right? So it kind of could have the potential of resetting the market. So that equilibrium, that moment in time could shift, right? And that suggests the possibility of a more proactive stewardship on the township's part, right? A stewardship based on what stakeholders want in their downtown, what they can realistically have given market forces, and finally, what does the overall retail mix itself need? And you might be like thinking, what does that mean? Like, how could a retail mix have needs, right? Well, I'll give you an example. Remember what I talked to you about, that comparison shopping thrives on scale, right? It also works in the other direction. If you go from having 7 boutiques down to 4, down to 2, those boutiques that are still existing do even worse, right? There's kind of a declining return to scale, right? You need a certain threshold, right, to keep this mix working. So the retail mix needs things too. So some of the questions which I think which we'll want your feedback on, and which can help to guide us as we propose a plan to you for what role the township can play, is what kind of retail mix do you want, ideally, in 5 years in downtown Wayne? What kinds of retail categories, what kinds of businesses? From how far do you want it to draw customers? I heard repeatedly that there isn't that much of a draw right now from the other side of the Blue Route. Do you want to expand Wayne's draw, or do you want it to stay local, very local in its, in its reach? In which case, there are some trade-offs to that. And what kind of customer? What kind of customer do we ideally want in Wayne? Right? These are questions which it would be really helpful to get your feedback on. And then next time I come back to you, we'll come back to you with some strategies for how we can help to influence these things. Obviously, we don't have complete control of them, not even close. It's a free market, and so there's only so much a township can do. There's only so much a township should do. But that could form the basis of a few things that it can do. And so I look forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'm getting the, you shut up?
Okay. As Adam said, my name is Megan Gardo. I'm a senior analyst with Walker Consultants. I've been working with parking and mobility for almost 20 years, helping municipalities, universities, hospitals, private developers quantify and identify their parking situations and then come up with strategies to help them better manage their existing conditions and plan for the future. Ooh, wrong direction. So you'll notice based off of this picture that the boundaries for the study area for parking are slightly different than the boundaries for the overall study. We're looking at an area really bound by the railroad tracks to the north, Luella Ave, Luella Court sort of to the east, South Wayne and West Wayne Avenues to the south, and Bloomingdale Avenue and Banbury Way to the west. Within those boundaries, there's about 3.4 million square feet of space. And of that space, those blue and pink areas highlighted account for about 30% of the land mass in the area. 30%, kind of average, maybe a little high if you're aiming for a more walkable, economically friendly community. But it's on the average to high side for downtown communities. We are.
What is the blue? You said the.
Blue is the.
What does it stand for?
Just that they're off-street parking.
Oh, that's the part.
That's the parking. The blue and the pink are the parking in the area. Blue is off-street. Yeah. It's always surprising how much of your parking is or how much of your land use is parking. And the pink is where all of the on-street parking spaces are. As part of this study, our goal was To understand how parking is being utilized today, if there was any available parking in the area, where those surpluses might be, and when the hot spots are. How long are people parking in the area? How long are customers parking, and where are customers parking? How long are employees parking, and where are they and or should they be parking? In order to talk about parking, we generally use 3 different metrics. One of those metrics is parking occupancy. Parking occupancy measures the number of spaces being used in a parking facility during a certain time of day. Your target should be somewhere around 85% of capacity. When you get over 85 to 90% of capacity on street or in a parking lot, people get frustrated. It takes longer to search. It causes delays. Lower occupancy levels, on the other hand, can mean lots are not really favorable. They're not in the location where people need them. Or they're just not being well advertised as parking options. The other 2 metrics that we look at when we talk about parking systems are parking duration and parking turnover. Duration is how long is a car in a space, the average length of stay. In a commercial setting, you want cars to be parked for about 2 hours. And then move off and you get a new set of vehicles in the area. You want those short-term parkers to be in the core of your area, and you want the long-term parkers to be on the periphery of your area. And it's okay if they stay for longer periods of time because they're not in those core places where you want high also turnover, where you want the spaces to continue to have new parkers in them. Again, in a commercial area, you want to see high turnover. You want those spaces to turn over 4+ times throughout the day. Higher turnover means more customers, means more traffic into your area, means more people buying and visiting all of your restaurants and retail places. So, overall parking supply and demand in Wayne. The first step was to understand where the existing parking was today. And even before you understand how it's utilized, understanding where it is and what kind of parking it is tells you a lot about a parking system. I was here in September. There are about 2,400 parking spaces in downtown Wayne within these boundaries. About 60% of them, or about 1,400 spaces, are privately owned and reserved for a specific business. And there's another 30% that are essentially publicly available parking, either on street or off street in private lots. There's also, for this case, we also noted that the SEPTA lot is there, and there were 2 residential multifamily lots that we also observed. Part of understanding where parking is, location of parking, also influences the downtown circulation of parking, or of your downtown and pedestrian and vehicular access. A lot of your parking, almost all of your parking, is congregated in that northeast corner along North Wayne Avenue. It's driving parking and traffic into that area, pedestrians into that area. It's also driving conflict into that area. So we were looking at that. We were also looking at your on-street parking. On-street parking is a vital piece of a downtown community. There are almost 400, I think there's actually a little over 400 spaces of parking, on-street parking in your downtown area. And the majority of those are 2-hour metered parking. They're located along North and South Wayne Avenue and along West Lancaster and East Lancaster Avenue in those commercial cores, the areas where you want them turning over regularly so they have their 2-hour limits. So, I did occupancy counts on September 24th, which was a Wednesday in downtown Wayne. You may or may not have seen me walking around the crazy person counting cars. But we did counts at 10, 12, 2, and 6 p.m. Office types of uses tend to peak around 10. Obviously, there's a lunch peak here. Everything kind of slows down a little bit at 2 o'clock and then picks up again around dinner. People are coming home, leaving from work. Peak parking demand was observed around noon in downtown Wayne. And at that point, about 66% of the spaces in the area were occupied. You can see there are areas that were highlighted in red, meaning that they were at or near capacity, but there's also many, many locations that are highlighted in green and yellow that show that there was low occupancy at that point in time. There was availability on that street or in that lot to meet the parking needs of the area. The long and the short of the parking occupancy count was that even during the peak hour, there's parking in the downtown. In private lots, there's over 550 parking spaces available at the peak hour. At dinner time, there's 900 parking spaces available. Many of them are in the private lots, but they are available. And they represent an opportunity, an untapped opportunity. Even within your public off-street system, there is parking. It's just not necessarily where you want it to be. Even at lunch, 82 spaces were available within this 4-block area. At dinner time, there were even more. There was almost 130 spaces. And that doesn't include the SEPTA lot, which had another 100 spaces available at dinner time. And even on street, there were spaces available, 150 to almost 200 spaces, depending on the time of day. So there are spaces available. It's just not necessarily where you want to park. And yes, some of the lots are far away. The West Avenue lot is almost 1,000 feet away. The South Wayne lot is about 800 feet away. Even the Waynewood lot is about 750 feet away. The average person walks about 2.5 to 3 miles per hour. That equates to about 4 feet a second. Most of these lots, 4 minutes away at most, and most of them have sidewalks. They are easily accessible. They're just not directly in front or in the line of sight of where you most want to go. Still think it's far away? You go to the mall on a Friday night and you want to go eat at Bonefish. You're going to be parking at the back of that parking lot right there. I think it's the purple lot. That's an easy 600-foot walking distance. You want to go from Primark over to the new Netflix house, that's almost 2,300 feet. Even more, you want to go from Primark over to the Cheesecake Factory because you shopped and now you're going to go eat dinner there, 3,200 feet. That's 2/3 of a mile. It's all about perception and what you're willing to walk.
Well, you're going to drive your car from Primar to the cheesecake.
I won't. I'll walk. You gotta earn that cheesecake. You gotta earn that cheesecake. I'm just saying.
Or you're walking inside.
You are walking inside, so the comfort level is a little farther, but it's still 2/3 of a mile. That's 3,200 feet is still. That's going to take you 10 minutes easy to go clear across the mall.
Let's let her give her presentation. We're going to have plenty of time.
So one of the arguments might be, you just counted on a slow day. That's not what really happens every day in downtown Wayne. To counteract that argument, we used the data from your Park Mobile and your kiosk systems to understand how many parking transactions happen at your public parking spaces throughout the year. And on a month-to-month basis, May and September were some of the busiest months of the year. In May, which was the busiest month, there were about 18,000 transactions. September, similarly, about 18,000 transactions. September is when we counted. It's a typical busy day. 18,000 transactions per month. is a lot of parking spaces and a lot of parkers using those parking spaces. So there are typically two kinds of parkers in a parking system. There's the short-term parker, which is usually your customer parker, and there's the long-term parkers, which are either customers that are staying for a little bit longer or more likely your employees. So first I wanted to focus on your short-term customer parking. Again, we mine the data that already exists from your Park Mobile systems to understand how long cars are staying and how often spaces are turning over. All of these facilities have a 2-hour parking limit, and you'll notice that as a result, most of them are turning over 4+ times a day. As I said earlier, in a really healthy downtown environment, you want spaces turning over 4 or 5 times a day. And this is only for 10 hours of day where they're paying for parking from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Luella Court, North Wayne Avenue, spaces are turning over pretty regularly. Even on West Lancaster Avenue, those spaces are turning over pretty regularly. Less so, especially in the North Wayne lot, the 2-hour section of the North Wayne lot, and in the South Wayne lot. But there's actually a reason for that. Same story. These are all the short-term parking facilities, and they all have 2-hour parking limits. And it seems like that the 2-hour limit is being effectively enforced, meaning that the average length of stay is right around 2 hours in most of these facilities, with the exception of Luella Court, which also had a slightly lower turnover, and South Wayne Avenue, which also had a slightly lower turnover rate. North Wayne Avenue, though, totally turning over, having a low turnover, or I'm sorry, a low length of stay and regular turnover of those spaces, which is great. You want spaces to turn over regularly, especially for those businesses that don't have off-street parking. Those spaces need to turn over so that customers can get in and get out and regularly have convenient access to the spaces, or to the facilities. You can see along East Lancaster Avenue and even along Luella Court, those spaces are turning, the average length of stay on those areas is maybe 2.5 hours. Even along North Wayne Avenue and in the 2-hour section of the North Wayne lot, cars are turning over pretty regular, or I'm sorry, the length of stay is pretty low, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Waynewood lot does experience a slightly longer length of stay, about 3 to 4 hours. It is one of the only off-street parking options for businesses on Luella Court, but it's also one of the lots designated for employee parking as part of the WBOD district. The other trend that we noticed that I noticed as I was going through some of the data was the utilization of that core parking area along North Wayne Avenue, the North Wayne and Waynewood lots. They are highly occupied at 12 and at 6 p.m., less so at 10 a.m. and at 2 p.m. What I find interesting with these is you can see at noon, right along Lancaster Avenue, it's yellow, pretty low occupancy, below 65%. The businesses on West Lancaster Avenue are also open during the noon hour. By the time you get to 6 p.m., many of the businesses along West Lancaster Avenue, especially on that side of West Lancaster Avenue, are pretty much closed for the day. But the parking on that street is very well utilized. Same story, Wayne Avenue, the Waynewood lot itself is actually not as well utilized at 6 p.m. But the SEPTA lot is completely open. There's almost nobody parking in the SEPTA lot, despite the fact that it's closer than the Waynewood lot and the Lancaster Avenue lot, or the Lancaster Avenue. And one of those reasons, I think, is SEPTA still charges for parking until 2 a.m. The township stops charging for parking at 6 p.m. It's an indication that cost might be more important to your parkers and your visitors than proximity to their destination. It's something to explore as we go forward. Employees and long-term parkers. The WBOD offers a permit system for employees and business owners for the South Wayne lot, the West Avenue lot, which was previously the Bellevue lot when I was doing my parking study, and the Waynewood lot. To understand if employees are actually parking where they're supposed to be parking, we again mined your Park Mobile data for the month of May and looked to see where your repeat parkers were parking and where your long-term repeat parkers were parking. The long-term repeat parkers were in your Bellevue lot, your North Wayne lot, your South Wayne lot, and your Waynewood lot, exactly where they're supposed to be, with the exception of the North Wayne lot. They may be employees and business owners, though more likely commuters, but there's probably a mix of people in there. Employees arrive in the morning and stay all day. Their average length of stay is obviously much longer. 2 hours is what we would expect for customers. Many of these locations, they are staying for 4+ hours. South Wayne, a little bit lower, but there's also a mix of parkers in that lot. Sorry. But the average length of stay in these facilities is much longer than they are in the customer-driven areas. They're also turning over less frequently because the employees don't come and go throughout the day. So Bellevue lot may be turned over once per day. South Wayne lot, same story. In the 10-hour section of the North Wayne lot, though, you can see that it's definitely supporting a mix of users still because they are turning over more frequently. The moral of the story is because they don't come and go throughout the day, and because they park once and leave their car, and it's much easier for them to park in the more peripherally located lots and still be able to access where they need to go. So with all of those things in mind, I want to talk a little bit about parking management best practices that we'll start to think about a little bit more as we get into the next phase of the study. All of our management recommendations start with this triangle. There's 3 points: cost, availability, and proximity, the parking triangle. You can have 2 of the 3 points on this triangle at any given time, but you can't have all 3 at the same time. You can have low cost and available parking, but it won't be near anything that you want. You can have available parking and in close proximity to your destination, but it most certainly will not be low cost and or free. All of everything we think about in terms of parking management recommendations comes back to this triangle. And more parking isn't always the answer. Our first step is always to look at how can you use your existing parking better. Parking is expensive. To build parking is extremely expensive. We still want to understand how future development in the area might impact parking going forward, so that'll be part of our next step. Understanding where there might be shortages over the long-term horizon. But before we ever consider pursuing any additional capacity, we want to look at your policies to try and to balance your supply and your demand a little bit more. Maybe you charge more for the parking that's in close proximity, and people who are willing to pay more go into that area, and people who are not willing to pay more go on to the more peripheral locations. Look at extending parking into the evening, again, so that you are balancing where people want to be with where they can afford to be. In that same vein, you also want to kind of offer a little bit of a carrot and a stick. So maybe that first ticket that happens is a courtesy ticket instead of an actual ticket. Looking at shared parking agreements to maximize your private parking. As I said, who should be paying for parking? Parking is almost never free. Somebody always has to pay for parking. Whether the user pays for parking or the taxpayer pays for parking, somebody always has to pay for parking. And lots of parking discourages walkability and multimodal access, and there's a lost opportunity to the investment in the community if your space is occupied by parking rather than retail and restaurant and destination entertainment facilities. We're looking at, can existing parking facilities be used more effectively? As I said, there is a plethora of private parking available, especially in the evening. There's 900 parking spaces were available. Through shared parking agreements, either with the township or between businesses, you could gain access to those spaces, maybe only on nights, maybe only on weekends. But it is definitely something to consider as we go forward. And my last slide is, again, the cost of parking is real. So a new surface parking lot, $6,000 to $10,000 per space. Structured parking, somewhere in the family of $25,000 to $40,000 per space, and that's before you get into ground floor retail or pretty facades around on the outside. That doesn't include land acquisition. It doesn't include the ongoing operating costs. By comparison, one parking space in your system, assuming it was occupied all 10 hours of the day, 6 days a week, for a whole year, generates about $1,500. Just to keep in mind as you go forward, parking is expensive. We want to look at ways to maximize what you have today before you make a major capital investment in anything. And I return it back to Adam.
So first, thank you all. I know that was an incredible amount of information. I told Mike next presentation I'm going to chain him to this microphone because this was recorded. So if there's anybody who you know in the township, any business owner, any person who you think like really should be listening to this presentation, it's going to be up on the website and you should send it to them because I don't know about you, but I learned a ton listening to these people. We're going to break out now into the open house. I'm going to say this. There are 15 stations out there. You do not have to rush to Michael and Megan right away to talk to them. I know you all want to bend their ears. There's a lot of stuff. I would like you to very much talk to them, but please do give them a little bit of space to talk to everybody and don't rush there. There are going to be opportunities for you to place dots and leave comments on there. One thing that I want to be really clear about is that we know there are things that we might have missed here, right? These boards, we're trying to cover as much ground as we possibly can. There's a board out there sort of as you're leaving. It's got a QR code on it and it's got a big blank board. If there's something you think we missed, something that isn't on any of the boards that you want us to be paying attention to, leave a point of feedback there. So with that, please take your time. We got about an hour here. Please join us out in the lobby and talk to us about Wayne. All right, thank you.